Hello, I'm Simon Whistler. You're watching TopTenzNet, and in the video today we're looking at the top 10 ridiculous theories about the ancient pyramids of Giza. The ancient pyramids at Giza have long been one of the wonders of the ancient world and have captured imaginations for thousands of years. Even today, they would have been quite difficult to construct, and the incredible treasures found within, as well as the strange traditions of those who built them, has only added fuel to all of the speculation about them. While most Egyptologists believe that the pyramids were originally meant as burial chambers and built using clever but primitive methods, many theorists disagree and have come up with their own ideas on what they were actually used for and how they were actually built. Let's get started. Number 10. The pyramids were actually gigantic ancient power plants. Some theorists are convinced that the real purpose of the pyramids had to be something incredibly complicated and beyond any technology anyone even believes in today. They claim that the pyramids are actually gigantic power plants and that they used special sound frequencies that emanate from the inner parts of the earth to conduct great amounts of power. According to the theorists, the shafts in the pyramid help channel the frequencies up and out of the pyramid and into a sphere over nearby villages. Supposedly, these shafts were once lined with gold in order to further ensure that only the correct frequencies were conducted. The theorists claim that this technology was capable of creating a self-sustained energy field that had a radius of several miles out from the pyramid and kept batteries, lights, and other electronics, which they claim the ancient Egyptians had, all charged without even needing to be plugged into anything. This entire theory is rather fantastic thinking, as it seems humanity would be using something that is clearly an incredibly convenient free energy source if it were real or possible. Number 9. The pyramids were designed to store grain for a huge famine. Last year, presidential candidate and successful neurosurgeon Ben Carson made the news when he claimed that the Great Pyramids had been constructed in order to store grain in advance of a huge famine. His source for this was claiming that the Bible said so, and many people immediately tried to make it a religious controversy, but Dr. Carson is quite confused about his timeline of events in the first place. The Great Pyramids were built long before the period in the Bible where the famine even occurred, so they couldn't have been originally made for this purpose. Further, Egyptologists have pointed out that even in a pinch they would have made fairly poor granaries. But the really silly part is that saying that the pyramids didn't store grain in no way invalidates the Bible story, as the story in the Bible never said pyramids were used in the first place to store the grain. In fact, ancient people knew how to build granaries specifically for that purpose quite well and could construct them quickly and easily when needed. There would have been absolutely no need for such gigantic structures. If the Bible story were true, they simply could have constructed regular granaries. Number 8. The nearby Sphinx actually has an alien spaceship still awaiting underneath. Many mystic groups and occult orders over the years have been fascinated with Egyptian magic, the pyramids themselves, and the entire surrounding area. Some have even gone to the trouble to channel with spirits in an attempt to learn things about the past traditions of ancient Egypt, and have come up with some very strange ideas. According to some theorists, a sort of poem that occultists claim came from the emerald tablets of Thor the Atlantean suggests that there is some kind of strange ship buried underneath the Giza plateau, beneath the Great Sphinx. The poem essentially claims that there is an actual spaceship under a lion-shaped figure out in the desert, and that if the ship is dug up from the ground, its power will allow the user to conquer with ease. The occultists are convinced that the poem translated from the tablets, which only one person ever saw, proves that an alien or some advanced being of some sort actually left a spaceship buried under the ground. While the idea is incredibly bizarre, it would be difficult to disprove, as the Egyptian authorities are not about to let anyone excavate the entire ground underneath the Great Sphinx. Number 7. The pyramids are a navigational beacon for alien beings. Conspiracy buffs out there have insisted that the pyramids are simply far, far more than we could ever imagine and have built absurdly elaborate theories. One of these theories claims that the incredible effort that went into the pyramids was so that alien beings would be able to navigate their way to and from our planet. The theorists begin with the fairly common pyramid conspiracy that the pyramids were actually built directly in the center of the Earth's landmass, and also perfectly align with the 3 stars of the constellation Orion. While most theorists stop here and don't go much further, some do believe that it was truly a highly technological beacon. These theorists believe this ancient, possibly alien technology allowed them to shoot a beam of light all the way out into space that created a perfect beacon for navigating in ships. Some even believe that the pyramids at Giza are only a part of a larger network of pyramidal navigation beacons, some of which are in South America. Number 6. The pyramids were built by the residents of Atlantis. A few years ago, a group of German wannabe scientist conspiracy theorists got themselves in hot water while visiting the ancient pyramids at Giza. They had managed to finagle permission to see their way into the pyramid and explore certain parts that most people don't get to see. But they abused the privilege by doing their level best to sneak artifacts out of the country. While many people do attempt to smuggle artifacts out of the country in order to get rich, these men were doing so to try and prove their conspiracy theory and disprove mainstream Egyptology. They believe that mainstream Egyptologists are covering up the real truth and were planning to run pigment and other tests on artifacts related to the pharaoh Khufu, who claimed to have built many of the pyramids. They are convinced that Khufu came upon the pyramids much later, repurposed them for his own use, and then later took credit and claimed responsibility for having them built. They believe that if the dating on various items doesn't match up in testing, that it will prove their theory. The biggest hole in their theory is that their alternate belief is that the pyramids were created by Atlanteans, the legendary people from the city made up by Plato that never existed in the first place. Number 5. The pyramids are actually gigantic water pumps. Some people state that Egyptologists have not actually found much in the way of mummies inside actual pyramids. Now, on the other hand, there is a huge amount of evidence that does point to this being the pyramid's original purpose. However, if some of the theorists who believe that they were not burial chambers are correct, there still had to be a major purpose for the pyramids that made some semblance of sense. While the theory could be completely off base and does sound a little fantastic, the water pump theory has been independently tested and at least has some interesting features to it that do seem plausible. Part of the theory centers on the fact that the burial chamber and other theories do not take much account for the massive subterranean chamber near the bottom of the Great Pyramid. Some theorists, after testing multiple models, including one using an actual pond, have managed to simulate a sort of water pump. While they did have to make a few small modifications on the original design of the pyramid, it was still a very close fit, and it did work as a water pump. These theorists believe there was a tunnel at some point that connected to the Nile to facilitate this function. If true, this theory could go hand in hand with the theory that water channels were used to help build the pyramids in the first place. Number 4. The pyramids were built by hybrid giants called Nephilim. For those who haven't heard of them, the Nephilim are a supposed hybrid people mentioned in the Bible that were the children of men and some kind of fallen angels. Some theorists also believe that the biblical stories are referring to the offspring of space aliens who bred with human beings. The stories in the Bible and other ancient myths tell of incredible giant people who were hybrids, looked somewhat different from humans, and were almost unbelievable in proportion. Theorists point to ancient pictures where there are beings that seem to tower over other human-like beings, including one where the supposed Nephilim are equally as tall as a giraffe. They also point to alleged giant fingerprints and footprints cast in ancient stones and other such proofs of giant beings that once walked the land. Some theorists claim that instead of employing other clever means to build the pyramids, they simply employed these giants that were easily able to lift the huge blocks. Of course, the big problem with this theory is that there have always been giants existing in and out of history because of rare genetic disorders, such as Andre the Giant in modern days, and even the strongest ones known of would hardly be able to lift such giant blocks. Number 3. Some theorists claim there is an ancient underground city beneath the pyramids. A few years ago, a theorist was reading old books about explorers who searched the pyramids and the surrounding areas, as well as more esoteric historical texts, and noticed that there were claims of a cave system beneath the pyramids of Giza. After a lot of clever searching, he finally managed to find an entrance to a fairly large cave complex beneath the ground near the pyramids. The caves were fairly narrow in a lot of places and didn't lend greatly to exploration, but he was struck by inspiration as he walked through them. He wondered if the dark caves leading under the ground once inspired the myths of the dark underworld that Egyptians face after death. While our intrepid explorer mainly thinks the caves are really cool and may have psychologically affected the ancient Egyptians, some theorists believe that there is way more going on. They point to ancient legends that claim there were once multiple marble cities underneath the Giza plateau, and that the pyramids were only a surface entrance to a much greater city. These theorists claim that there are huge cathedral-sized rooms of breathtaking beauty and design, which are likely filled with artifacts, and they're just waiting to be found. If only we could go search for them. Number 2. The ancient Egyptian and Sumerian giants hidden in stasis chambers around the world. According to conspiracy theorists, someone who secretly works for the government once told them of secret stasis chambers where a once existing race known as the Builders are hiding, waiting for the right time to come out and rule again. These beings are giants with red beards and pale skin, using special crystal technology to slow down time. The stories also allege that there are stasis chambers like this squirreled away all over the world, with some occupants looking slightly different, and that some of the ones that have been found had failed and their occupants had died. According to theorists, to complicate matters further, the beings seemed squashed into their stasis pods, as if they somehow simply took advantage of technology someone else had already built. Either way, the theorists believe that these beings are ancient and are using technology to make themselves essentially immortal. The story takes a creepier turn in that they claim that there was evidence some had left in the past already, slowly exiting over time, and at one chamber some had written their names on the wall on the way out. Some of these names were written in ancient Egyptian or Sumerian, indicating a link to the pyramids, the ancient world, and alien theories. Another name supposedly written near the entrance to one of these chambers was Abraham Lincoln, who in a speech once mentioned an extinct race of giants who walked the land. Of course, most sane historians would say his words were taken out of context to promote such theories. Number 1. Some theorists are convinced the pyramids used real light bulbs and everything. While some theorists go to great lengths to explain the pyramids and their purpose, some people get a bit more caught up in the minutiae and focus on very specific hieroglyphs that seem to depict modern objects. The more likely truth, of course, is that it is easy for us to see modern objects in their drawings because our own inventions are familiar to us, so we see what makes sense to us. However, that doesn't stop some theorists from going to incredibly elaborate lengths to explain why their theory makes sense. One theorist saw a hieroglyphic drawing that sort of looks like a really elongated light bulb if you squinted it really hard, but was more likely some kind of depiction of a snake, possibly in a vase. The picture itself is incredibly disproportional if it were used to depict a light bulb, and it is almost as large as the person who seems to be holding it. Also, holding up a gigantic light bulb doesn't seem like a very practical use for it. However, the theorist has more than just pictures to prove his case. He believes that the lack of major soot inside the pyramids, in the spots where hieroglyphics were found, points at there being an artificial light source. After all, even with full sunlight outside, many of the internal parts of the pyramid would still have been pitch black, and writing on them accurately would have been very hard to do. Or the hieroglyphs could have been put there while the pyramid was being built, while it was still open to the light of day. So I really hope you found that video interesting. If you did, please do hit that thumbs up button below, and don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. There's a button on the screen as well as below the video. Also, over there on the right are a couple of other videos that you might enjoy if you enjoyed this one, and thank you for watching.